ABC Radio Brisbane.
On ABC Radio Brisbane, it's 35 minutes past 4. My name's Rachel Mealy. I'm in for Steve Austin today, who's not very well. Get well soon, Steve. Well, how would you feel about new townhouses being banned from your neighbourhood? Last month, the state governed light to Brisbane City Council to effectively ban townhouses and apartment block developments in some of Brisbane's character suburbs. This means the ban would apply to about 2/3 of all residential land across the city, particularly outer Brisbane suburbs. The Brisbane City Council says it's to protect the charm of some of Brisbane's character suburbs. Councillor Matthew Burke is the chair of the City Planning Committee and the councillor for the Jamboree ward. I'll just try and get his comments. This is what he had to say about protecting some of the charm of some of Brisbane's character suburbs.
Suburbs that we have in the city, particularly out in the outer areas, we've had townhouse developments going on some of those larger blocks that are out there. And what we're trying to do is have a conversation with the community. They've said to us that they don't like seeing townhouses in those sort of areas, and we're taking steps to stop those from happening across the city. We're doing a housing strategy as well at the moment. And it's really important to make sure we have housing diversity across the city, but we also want to make sure that if we are seeing density and an increase in unit developments or townhouses, that they're close to public transport nodes, close to other services, and not being built in the outer suburbs where they don't have access to, and it puts additional strain on the residents and on services that are provided by council. So it protects about 63% of the city that's currently zoned for homes. So anywhere where it's what's called low-density residential, if you think about those outer suburbs coming into Chapel Hill, areas to the north through Chermside and areas like that, where we have traditional 1- and 2-storey homes, is where we're trying to stop these large townhouse developments from happening. But what we do is also we do our neighbourhood plans, and we talk to the community about where we can put some increased density around those public transport nodes as well. So it's not just about stopping townhouses, we get the right locations where we put them.
That's Councillor Matthew Burke, who's the chair of the City Planning Committee and the councillor for the Jamboree ward. Now, some experts say townhouses should stay in Brisbane's low-density areas. Natalie Raymond is from the pro-development group YIMBY, which stands for Yes in My Backyard. Hello, Natalie.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Why do you believe this is a poor planning decision by the Brisbane City Council?
Well, I guess for me, I just see it as heavy-handed. It's taking away a housing typology before we really discuss with the community what a townhouse actually is, or what a townhouse actually is, or what it can be. Who lives in these townhouses? Why did they choose to live in the houses? And why they're a good thing for our city, particularly diversity, choice, affordability, sustainability.
Why do you think, I heard you say diversity, why do you think diversity is needed in our suburbs?
Well, I think we need to make sure who have all different backgrounds, have different needs, have different income levels, have different choices. You know, people might not want to be mowing their backyard every weekend. They might embrace the sharing economy and want a little backyard and then a big shared communal space. They might want, a little quiet, non-public street where the kids can still kick a footy around or play cricket.
Do you think that the ban would put added stress on anyone looking to downsize? How do you think it might impact the property market?
I feel like if we're going to ban it from our low-density suburbs and emerging community areas, which is also on the cards, this is, as they say, 2/3 or potentially more of our residential land. And where we're unlocking some density, that's around our transport nodes and our centres, but that's being unlocked into high-rise apartments. So we shouldn't have a city where all our choices are living in high or living in an expensive family home. People need to have other choices.
Why do you think that word townhouse, you said that it hasn't even properly been defined. Why has it become a dirty word in Brisbane?
Yeah, I feel like it's not the typology, it's not the townhouse, it's what we've seen and experienced in townhouses. And so, people might associate a development that they didn't like some years ago, and that's what they think a townhouse is. Also, the policy for some years now has been that you can't build a townhouse in these areas unless you find a block of 3,000 square metres or more. So, of course, you're going to see more than just 3 dwellings on it, more than, those lovely row houses or triplexes or villas that you might see in other countries, because we put artificial rules on ourselves, saying we had to find these 3,000 square metre sites. So maybe that's it. Maybe it's the design. Maybe it's what they look like. But let's not throw the whole thing out.
On ABC Radio Brisbane, I'm Rachel Mealy. I'm talking to Natalie Raymond from the pro-development group YIMBY, which stands for Yes in My Backyard. Tell me a little bit about your group. Why did you form?
So we absolutely formed because of these sorts of debates, and we feel the argument is not put to the media, into the discussion. It's often that, there might be a next door neighbour that's been upset for a particular reason, has rallied their friends, and it's about, no, not in my backyard. There's often images in the media with someone crossing their arms and saying, no, we don't want this. And we don't go that next step into the conversation to say why this would actually be good for our city. Do our suburbs need to all do a little bit more heavy lifting because we are a growing city? How are we going to have that growth and be sustainable? Or are we really wanting to be a place like we might associate with America, where we're just sprawling cities, where we push the housing out and we all get in our cars and drive to work?
That's a good question. Let's ask the listeners. How would you describe your suburb? Is it leafy, quiet, friendly, a character suburb? Or would you say it's becoming overdeveloped? I'd love to hear your views this afternoon. 612. Are you happy with the way your suburb has changed over the past 5, 10 years, 20 years? Let me know. 1300 222 612 is our number here. Now, Natalie Raymond is with me from the pro-development group YIMBY. The decision to ban townhouses came out of an extensive consultation process by the Brisbane City Council called Plan Your Business. But so you're saying that the council hasn't listened, but clearly there was a consultation process. Why do you say what you do?
So what we're saying is, I think we need to have a more detailed, certainly discuss what it is that we like about our suburbs, what is the character of our suburbs, and actually understand that in terms of a housing typology. I think we've, connected from a conversation around, what's our character and do we want backyards and how we're going to protect that. And we've found a solution, but is that the only solution? Should we be talking about other things?
In other big cities of the world, we're seeing that trend of what you're talking about, to go that way into changing planning laws to encourage more townhouses and units and a mix of dwellings. What's your understanding about what's happening on the world stage?
I find it so fun because when you put into Google a search of housing protest and look for photos, in Brisbane, certainly, or locally, we're seeing those sort of images. Not in my backyard, we don't want this sort of housing, stop housing. But if you go and click, you want to see images from around the world, internationally, you can see in these major cities of the world, and for example in America, where those images are now the exact opposite. The housing protest is more housing. Housing is a human right. Legalise housing. We need to have more housing in our city so that it's affordable. So they've actually turned the discussion the other way around. And so what we're seeing, I think the headline in Oregon is trying to be the first state in America to actually ban areas for only single-family dwellings. So they're doing the exact opposite of what we're doing. We're trying to protect it without perhaps looking to the future. And these cities are that probably a little bit more progressed. Maybe they're suffering a bit more of a housing crisis with affordability issues, and they're starting to realise continue to have these sprawling cities of only, 3/4 of our residential land as only single-family dwellings.
Would it be true to say that there's a disconnect in the definition of character? You seem to define character as people and as movement in a suburb, whereas others might say it's all about the heritage, values and the Queenslander and that kind of built environment.
Absolutely. That's the conversation that I want to have. So for me, character might mean one thing. Character for a lot of people in Brisbane does mean that traditional building character, the Queenslander. Most of the suburbs where you find those Queenslanders is not where we will be banning townhouses. That really needs to unlock what we're talking about here, because we're not talking about banning it in the inner suburbs like Paddington or West End or New Farm or Wilson, Wooloowin, some of those suburbs, they're already zoned for units. You go to those areas and they are the suburbs I would say have character, but they've got a mix of housing. These are going out further, the Gap, Kenmore, Jindalee, Brackenridge. These are the suburbs that we're talking about here. And usually they don't come in that conversation of character in terms of the built form character. And then I would say, I've lived in form character. And then I would say, I've lived in suburbs like New Farm where again it might not be so much of the traditional character, but it's that vitality that gives a place its character. So there's many different ways that we can define character. Is it the character because there's enough people that your children feel safe and you let them walk to school? Like, they're the things we should...
Character that you've described allows us all to age in our own suburb.
I love this conversation about who's living in these townhouses, because yes, there's a lot of young family where they move into a townhouse because they might not be able to afford a big house, but they want their kids to have a backyard. But there's also a lot of downsizers, those people that either aren't ready to go to retirement yet, but don't need the big yard, don't want to mow it all the time, but want to stay in their community that they've grown connected to. It's also, we're finding it's perhaps sometimes the divorcees. They've moved out of the big family home, but they want to stay close to their children and they don't need another big family home with a big backyard. So we need to just provide people with hope.
It's all about the mix is what I'm getting from you. What do you propose that Brisbane City Council does now to maintain the character of some of those suburbs while also encouraging affordable housing for residents?
I think we should put this ban on ice and discuss a real housing strategy where we talk about all of these different options and try to get them into all of our suburbs.
Natalie Raymond is from the pro-development group YIMBY, Yes in My Backyard. Natalie, thanks very much for coming in and telling me about that this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's Natalie Raymond from the pro-development group Yes in My Backyard. And Elizabeth has